again to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. It's the show that never ends. And with us today is somebody whom I think by now you're familiar with, and that is Dr. Eugene Narrett. We like him for a lot of reasons. One, he's a Jersey boy, and a man after my own heart. But he's been on recently to talk about his latest title, World War III, The War on the Jews and the Rise of the World Security State. And he also has another title available, and that is Israel and the End Times, Writings on the Logic and Service Turbulence of History. Also, a website for him, IsraelEndTimes.com. A lot of current articles are there, and he's got archives that date back, to like December 1992. So you can trace his progression, if you can say that, with the current events, and a lot of which have taken place in the last 15 years. Once again, Doc, from the Great Bay State, welcome to the Grassy Knoll.
Good to be with you, Keith.
All right. I think it was off the air that we were kicking around something. And in fact, I talked about it with Barry Chamish, who I interviewed yesterday, and I sent him the same information. And I think I can refresh your memory fairly well. We were looking at what was proposed for trade blocs / unions that are taking place now, that are scheduled for the future. And one of them was the Agadir bloc. Does that ring a bell?
Yes. It's a mostly North African and some Middle East trading bloc.
But does that word have some significance? I think you were telling me that it did. Something struck you about using that particular word.
Well, there was a conference there in the between the wars period or during the Second World War. I have to say, frankly, now I have forgotten the specific details. But it had to do with the regional bloc kind of arrangement.
Yeah, and you thought that the use of Agadir did have some kind of significance, if ironic significance.
Yeah, it has ironic significance, at least in the sense that the peace and prosperity partnerships that we hear so much about, I think, are really not about peace and prosperity, at least not for most people. They're about security in the not for public consumption sense of the word. So that's where I think the irony and the interest and the interesting and troubling connotations are.
I got an email from a listener in Toronto who gets a chance every so often to do some globetrotting. And one of the things that he did was send me this breakout of all the trading blocs / unions that are in the offing. And one of the things he said, and this goes back to what you said about security, or the appearance thereof. He said, it's amazing to me, and this is the listener, that those with whom we will soon fight, we will later trade with. And when you spoke of security, and of course that's the thing the League of Nations and the United Nations always put forth, and of course we'll have a third attempt at world government, which it looks like it's going to be successful, and they also talk, or they will sell, security and peace.
Yeah.
But it's neither really through harmony. It's through the absence of dissent and opposition, isn't it?
To a large extent, yes. It requires the absence of dissent from the new dogma that these regionalized groupings will actually produce prosperity and peace. That is something from which there can be no dissent. There can be no serious criticism. Anyone who discusses that is immediately labeled as some kind of conspiracy theorist and either ignored and or shouted down, often literally shouted down. And the sad thing is the people who seem to get on the mainstream media and talk about this stuff most often are people who hate America, people who hate Western civilization, leftists, to use just a shorthand phrase. And in a lot of ways, they really don't know what they're talking about, although they have some they have some clue that the globalization is not so great. They would like to see even more social democracy or even more de facto communism. If we look at you mentioned the League of Nations, Keith and its successor organization, which is continuing to be built up in a lot of ways. But the League of Nations is a very interesting example to show that the rationale of peace, or as they used to say 80 years ago, non-aggression. If you remember,
right.
You read about that. Everything was non-aggression pacts. And, aggressors would have their trade embargoed, and they could even be attacked by member states. In some cases, member states were obligated to attack them. But we saw in practice that especially under the leadership, call it that, or the pressures of the British diplomatic echelons and so on, that whenever a member state was attacked, or very often when a member state was attacked, it was the British that sabotaged attempts to either embargo or to punish in any way the aggressors. For example, Mussolini's Italy, when they attacked Ethiopia, and a great example, because all the British needed to do was close the Suez Canal to the Italian Navy. There didn't have to be any fighting, really, and the Italian Navy was never a match for the British, and that would have been the end of that. But they preferred to let Italy extend sway by conquest or occupation over more parts of Africa, which came back to bite them in the Second War, but it didn't seem to bother them, and of course Czechoslovakia was maybe the most glaring case. And today, just to bring it up to our own days, something that I wrote about a lot in the 90s and whose repercussions continue, was, of course, what was done to the Serbs.
Oh, yeah.
How Yugoslavia was fractured by NATO, actually originally by Germany, with Vatican approval, and then eventually with Anglo-American and NATO approval and bombing. Massive bombing and occupation, and creation of 3 Islamic states in the Balkans, less than 100 years after the Slavs had gotten Islamic imperial states out of the Balkans, and under the leadership of Alija Izetbegovic, who was a self-professed, what we would call today, a jihadist. And, a typical Islamic supremacist in the mainstream of Islam. Islam can be the only state and the only religion in an area, and the kuffar have to submit. So it's really not about peace and prosperity, and, of course, there are a lot of other examples of that, even more current.
On a little digression with regard to what we saw take place in what we now refer to as the former Yugoslavia, back at the turn, I guess it was just inside the 90s, this began, 1991, if I remember, in the summertime, late summer. When you heard of what was taking place, of the turmoil there, did you go back to a thought of the days when the Serbs and the Croats, I believe it was the Croats, that were so opposed to one another, since the Serbs, I think, blame the Croats for pretty much doing the work of the SS. Am I right in depicting that friction between those two peoples?
Yes, of course. It was had become very intense, certainly by the run-up to World War II, and even in the interwar period and before, the Italy and the Vatican, the state of Italy and the Vatican, which were not together on things, but on creating an autonomous Croatian state, a fascist Catholic state. That's probably why they got together on it, one reason anyway. They were involved with that from the early 1920s, and you can read some of the histories of Pacelli when he was the man who became Pius XII, what he was doing as Vatican Secretary of State, and some of what Mussolini's Italy was doing in the 20s. So yeah, there was at least from that period, any existent tensions were intensified. Of course, you've got the overlying religious divide, which was probably the reason for this 20th century crusade, call it that, to take down the Eastern Orthodox, even if it involves doing so in a pincer with Islam. It's a kind of partnership that in a lot of ways continues in various areas. So, the Serbs have a lot of reason for feeling very betrayed and brutalized. Here they were in World War II, ganged up on by Italy, the Vatican, and Germany, and massacred roughly 500,000 of them by the Croats, with the German army occupying the whole area. And now, in the just 45 years later, they're attacked again by the Croats under the leadership of Franco. I can't pronounce his first name. Tutman, who was an overt admirer of the Ustasha, and he said that a lot of times, and who just helped to orchestrate NATO's destruction of them. So that's kind of a template, I think, for the way this regionalized world system, or New World Order, some people call it, is going to function. Massive betrayals, and it's not at all about peace and prosperity. It's about creating and mismanaging crises, taking down nations, and I think sometimes, Keith, it's just taking down nations. The Vatican has its own particular agenda for, say, taking down Yugoslavia, and anyone who reads Ahrens and Loftus's book, the Unholy Trinity, there's just tons and tons and tons of material, of data on the fierce battles of espionage that were fought before, during, and after World War II, over and in Yugoslavia. These multifaceted game, really a war, a more or less non-shooting war between Russia, the Vatican, England, and Germany, and Tito's own intelligence agencies over Yugoslavia, which is now disposed of, as we see. Everything the Europeans supposedly didn't want, which was a Balkanized southeastern Europe, is exactly what they've got, including 3 Islamic states that have jihadists in and out of them all the time, including people who are murdering American troops in Mesopotamia.
I want to ask you a follow-up question, but I want to just kind of frame this in a sense, because I did not know what was going on, and a real quick little anecdote. In this August of 91, I had just gotten done officiating. I was an umpire at a youth tournament, and I did quite a few games, and the manager of this one team said to me, listen, when this is all over and done with, no matter who wins or loses, we'd like to invite you up to our sponsor's place, which is up in Fairview, New Jersey. And I said, oh, that's great. And the sponsor was La Fortunata. So the tournament was over. They, in fact, lost. I went up to La Fortunata, which I found, interestingly, had been the site of the old Italian coup. If you remember them springing up in places along New Jersey and other, ethnic areas in the metropolitan area. So I think I'm sitting amongst Italians. I go to the bar and I order a beer, and the manager joins me later, and all of a sudden they do a news flash. They had TVs all over this restaurant, which had pretty much become a card-playing place at that time of night. And I'm stopping them, and I'm looking, and I'm not really making sense why everybody's so pinned to the TV about this incursion into Yugoslavia. And the guy looked at me, this manager, and he said to me, you thought they were Italians, didn't you? I said, yeah. He says, no, they're not. He says, they're Yugoslavs. La Fortunata, of course, I thought was Italian, but there is, I think, some kind of propinquity between Yugoslavs and Italy in certain regions. Well, anyway, he sat there and gave me a quick history lesson on what was going down there. I had never, ever known the fractionalization, the factionalization of what was taking place, realizing the bad blood between the Serbs and the Croats. And then don't we get a third element introduced into this mix, and that is the Albanian Liberation Army, right?
Yes, of course. The KLA was the name that was mostly used in our media.
Right.
The Kosovo Liberation Army, whose explicit agenda, at least according to I can't pronounce his name. Vyzygoth, the Albanian leader. Help me, Keith.
Forget it. I'm worse than you are.
The names are tangled on my tongue. But he was calling for a resurrection of Greater Albania, or a recreation of Greater Albania, which, of course, is not something that has any historical basis. It was created under the Germans, mostly during World War II, under the patronage of the Germans and their puppet Croatian state, in which cardinals of the church played a major role. And, this takes us closer to us, to America, in terms that so many of those Croatian, even to call them fascists doesn't quite do it. The people involved in genocide were taken, not only helped by the Vatican to escape South America, but many of them came to America and came right into the CIA. And that has, that certainly is going to affect our. So the Germans come right into the CIA. Some people even say the CIA, and they show you statistics and examples, was largely created in the 46 and 47, or built up around this core of German and Croatian fascists, including SS officials. By the way, since you asked about the Greater Albania, which was to include Montenegro and Kosovo and other parts, and Macedonia, lo and behold, these are three new states that NATO, of all people, which is mainly the Anglo-American alliance, and anyone else who, at least for military purposes, are in their orbit, have recreated in the Southern Balkans. So it's a very interesting kind of correlation of forces. You would think, and very often, you would think that the Anglo-American bloc is always going to be competing with Germany, and that's the way it was first conceived by a lot of the creators of the regionalized world system. It was kind of these managed blocks, the three-block world, as it was called, between the Oceanic Alliance and a German-dominated continent, and Russia and whoever its satellites, Russia's satellites, might be. But here we were. When you look at the Balkans, it's very interesting to see it's very disturbing to see the degree of cooperation. And when you look into America's intelligence services, it's disturbing to see the degree of collaboration between the Oceanic bloc of English-speaking peoples and the Germans. And not because they're Germans, but with the vicious, genocidal kind of power-hungry people that they're working with, including jihadists, Islamic imperialists like Aliyah, is it Begovic?
Begovic, yeah. I wanted to ask you too. Do you think that there was a deliberate re-Balkanization of Europe, and if so, do you think there was a reason for it? And if so, what would that reason be to return the map almost to what it was pre-World War I?
Yes. Yes, I do think that was the intention, and it's certainly to decent, normal people who know a little history, it seems completely counterintuitive, so self-destructive. And I think the reason that this was a major matter of policy is because small states whose sovereignty has been impaired or in one way or to some degree, are much easier to manage and to either blackmail or bribe into a regional grouping in which they will have, very little say about the economic, social, and military conditions under which they live. And and of course, to the extent that they're small states with impaired sovereignty, their governing groups are usually going to be at the direct mercy of the dominant powers in the region, and they will therefore be corrupt, and they will be more likely to sell out their people in exchange for a place at the table, or even for protection against what was done to Milosevic, who was turned into a second Attila the Hun for trying to protect part of Serbia, and probably murdered before his last hearing and sentencing there up in forget if it was at The Hague.
The Hague, yep.
Brussels.
The Hague, yep.
Yeah, The Hague, about a year and a half ago. So an amazing coincidence. He had a heart attack right before his sentencing, so he couldn't speak. I think this is why they cripple so many nations. This is why they prefer, whether it's the German-dominated bloc or the Russian bloc or the Anglo-American bloc, and again, of course, I'm talking about the diplomatic, financial powers that run these blocs, not talking about the people as a whole, or even necessarily, in the case of America, the government as a whole, but the diplomatic, financial bloc and the media that they control and often that they own. It's in their interest to have small, crippled states that are easy to blackmail, and this is why every time Israel has won a war or even tries to defend itself in a very, very limited way against the daily terror, the genuine terror, not the terror bar that's orange or yellow or green or red on different days, but the rocket attacks on its cities is condemned, pressured, and behind the scenes undoubtedly blackmailed until you wind up with a puppet government that is basically just a little extension of the State Department and the CIA.
I want to return to this when we come back from doing a little business, but at this time I think it's good for you to speak about the two titles especially you have last come out with. The most recent is the World War III, the War on the Jews and the Rise of the World Security State, and also Israel and the End Times, Writings on the Logic and Surface Turbulence of History. Now, if I've got this right, and I said I didn't know if I would, but World War III, that title comes from Lightcatcher Books, is that correct?
Yes, the publisher is Lightcatcher Books, and their website is www.lightcatcherbooks.com. You can see there's a nifty little 90-second trailer, I think, on the book, and it's available there. And Israel and the End Times is at www.authorhouse.com, the publisher's website, or on my website. My new book, World War III, is really to suggest how the never-ending, to try to explain from various facets, sometimes going way back into ancient history of the pagan Middle East and Israel's attempts to exist there, and the Roman Empire and so on, and looking at the bizarre conflict between Israel and Hezbollah last summer, and all of the whole 20th dirty history of 20th century geopolitics in the Middle East, and involving the Jewish people, and trying to see why it is, using that as a major example, to ask and examine the question why it is that the West would repeatedly and consistently take down and cripple what could and should have been a major ally and asset, and instead to empower forces, Islamic forces, basically, that they already knew, the British certainly knew from their own experience, were volatile, uncontrollable, and hostile, and would attack them as soon as they had the opportunity. How can you possibly explain this bizarre, this suicidal, as well as vicious policy? And, by looking at the history of the League of Nations a little bit, some of the more salient, bizarre and suicidal British policies there in the Middle East and in Europe, I try to provide some answers for these questions so we can understand, which leads us to understanding what is this war on terror, which is, the immediate prompt for me. What exactly is the war on terror? Why can't it be won? Why can't it actually be waged? And to talk about all the fudging of the identity of the combatants, which continues to this day, and it did from the beginning. And it's a warning. It's a warning flag for all of us, because the world security state, as we've been saying, mostly in the context of the Balkans, is not about, what's generally understood by people to be security. It's about living with the constant threat of terror, and this happens on many levels. It's been happening for a long time in Western popular culture, especially in England first, and then in America, first in New England. How it is that we come to be living in a culture of terror, a culture with the manipulation of the passions and stampeding people to buy into security measures of various kinds, whether they're pharmaceutical or state security having to do with ID and work and so on.
I'm going to throw out a quick question, and then I want to return to where we left off. Especially with the idea of divide and conquer as it pertains to Europe, and in a way you can even look at what's happening in North America. The question I wanted to ask you, though, was recently, in fact, just this week, or last week I should say, because folks will be hearing this the week of the 28th, I'm doing a series of readings that I've entitled The Road to Orwell. It's based on the book The Road to Airstrip 1 by Ian Slater, published in 1985, and it's got rich stuff about Orwell and the writing of 1984 in Animal Farm. So I want to throw this out to you just to get your opinion. It actually raises the hair on my arms and neck and everywhere else when I read some of the statements that Orwell made, either in letters, correspondences, perhaps articles that have in periodicals we've long since forgotten, about exactly what he... And here's where I'm going with this, Doc.
Go ahead. Everything you're saying makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
All right. So here's what I'm saying. 1984, let's deal with that just alone. If you look at Animal Farm as a real whack upside the head to Russia. 1984, is it a prophecy from Orwell, or is it a warning, differentiating both and saying the warning means it can be averted if such and such happens? The prophecy saying you got no shot. What do you think about that, Doc?
I would amend that slightly.
Go ahead.
I think Orwell himself personally felt a great deal of despair. And I think he did, not only for personal reasons, but because 1984, that is George Orwell, whose real name was Eric Blair, novel 1984, was not so much a prophecy in the sense that this is what's going to happen because of what we're doing today. It was that. But even more so, it was a description of something, of trends in British policy, international and domestic, that already existed, that Orwell had observed for 20 years.
True.
That were observable. Mm-hmm. And that may help to explain, the public level, the social level of the despair in that second novel, the 1984, which is so heavy. It is, to me, it's one of the saddest, coldest pieces of literature that I've ever read. It's, you could almost call it despairing, and maybe take out the word almost. But it's the way those people, clearly the protagonist has a memory implanted in him, or an idea implanted in him by the state, purely so the state can punish him, and not even just as an example, but just as like you do an exercise, to exercise your total power and to keep everyone living in fear is absolutely chilling, as is the coldness of the state as a whole, the depersonalization, the lack of relationships between people, and the brutalization of anybody who tries to have anything remotely resembling a human relationship. So, he talks about the three-block world there. They're Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia. But Oceania, Eurasia, and East Asia were already in existence 20 years before he wrote the book. And he knew it.
Yeah.
And he lived through it and watched it happen. This was just one of the terms that the Round Table group dominated British foreign policy from, the first decade of the 20th century, and grew to dominate American foreign policy and intelligence, and of course first they get control of the media, and then they can create and destroy politicians pretty much at will. They can create Barack Obama, they can make Rudy Giuliani the security savior, they can make anyone who disagrees with them, non-people, etc. So they're very important books. Animal Farm is not as cold because it's more on that allegorical level that has to do with animals after all, and there's the sense that there can be changes if human beings will only apply themselves halfway honestly to this problem of collectivist totalitarianism that's grown up into their midst because of this sloppiness. But if you look at the animals, solely as representing where the human world is going, it's a terrifying but also warning description. He's saying, look at how totalitarian states operate. Look how they come into being. With a small group, a very small clique, they make promises to the people. They're going to improve this and they're going to improve that. And, of course, Orwell not being a socialist, after all, not being a person of faith, he doesn't talk about how that... he maybe alludes to the way that the Napoleon and Snowball destroy the animals' faith in the human world, in the goodness of a human world and a provider who cares for them and about them, like Farmer Jones did. So they did do that, with their whole ideology is Farmer Jones is just a tyrant. All he wants to do is sell you out, and we'll take care of you. And the one point I'll make, and then give it back to you, is, for all of us, think of the public school system in America, probably one of the healthiest states in the Western world. And look at what the public school education system, so to speak, indoctrination system, degradation system does to our children, right? First of all, it takes them away from us. And you are very close to being criminalized if you try to avoid taking them away, aside from paying big bucks to a private school. That you can do. But what if you can't spend $8,000 to $10,000 or more, up to $30,000 a year per child? Send them to a private school, which, by the way, have become, many of them are extremely politically correct these days. They sell globalism. In fact, I was recently at one, a very prestigious one, and in the course of about a dozen interviews, I mentioned to one of the faculty that, this very prestigious school is even selling as part of, on its homepage, teaching a global teaching its students to be global citizens and citizens of the world. He said, well, of course. What else are they?
They're also doing that in the public school system for those extremely bright individuals who get into the International Baccalaureate program. And I've gotten emails from actually adolescents, both in Canada and the United States, who kind of knew what was going on before they got involved in these programs, and after being in them for a while said, I want out of this. I am not...
The International
It's called the International Baccalaureate, or the IB program. If you check out local school districts, I know down here in Florida, they have, at least in Pasco County, when I check, it does definitely have a description of the IB program, what it means, and And for those people who have looked into it, who kind of get it, Doc, they're like, I'd really like my son or my daughter in that because it's accelerated, but we're not going with the global citizen stuff, so that isn't happening. Yeah, International Baccalaureate Program. Check it out in the public education systems of each state.
It's very interesting and disturbing. It'll be interesting to see if parents are successful in selecting the accelerated academic parts of that program and staying away from the indoctrination that they're a global citizen. This is, of course, part of destroying the sovereignty of America and the memory of America which includes, fundamentally, I think, for the people pushing this, the fact that it's a constitutional republic whose constitution was designed to limit the power of the central government to turn itself into a tyranny, to speak simply. So it'd be great if they're able to separate that out. But the public school system has been used to sell all kind, not only to destroy history and literature. After all, it's a union shop run by people who are not, in many cases, not really educators, but placeholders and indoctrinators of a lot of very nasty kind of things. It's a place where boys, particularly, are made to feel guilty and for being boys, and sometimes that's as overt as pins. What do you call them? Buttons that some of the teachers wear. I remember, some very nasty examples. About if boys had brains, they'd be okay. Things like that. I don't know. So they're very bad. Incredibly insulting. You think, what kind of a person could possibly do that to little kids? But that takes us maybe into another area that's very important, which is the feminist aspect of this push towards a regionalized world system and people who are ostensibly citizens of the world, but really just subjects of the states, whatever state happens to be dominant in that region. It's an important area, but probably beyond the scope of today's discussion.
Since we hope you'll be back, we'll have to put that on the back burner and not forget about it, and certainly address it because it's fertile fields for much discussion. But
just add this, Keith, as a quick P.S.
Sure.
Something that relates to that in the whole society, and that is, and back to our discussion, you remember in Animal Farm, Napoleon and Snowball said, well, let's just get just give us the puppies.
Mm-hmm.
Educate them so they won't grow up with these feelings of inferiority. And of course, a year or two later, they unleash the grown puppies as police dogs on the rest of the animals, and they attack their own kind. This is partly what's done, when the state intervenes in the family, which it seeks more and more reasons and methods of doing, one of which is the public education system. If you think of it, it's really the state intervening in the family and taking your children away.
Well, Doc, you hit it right on the head. You take a look at what Plato thought about this whole bit about, let the philosopher kings take the children away and teach them the way they should go out in the countryside. And then you look at what you got today with a very well-sounding title written by Hillary, It Takes a Village to Raise a Child, which is an extension of that Platoist mentality.
Of Plato, yes, and Rousseau, who upgraded it, and other people. Yeah, the state takes away the children. Let me read a brief quote.
Sure.
The new Reich will give its youth to no one, but will itself take youth and give youth its own education and its own upbringing. And there are probably a lot of other quotes from that. Of course, that's from Adolf Hitler. And it's a staple of communist education, too. And it's a tip-off to a totalitarian system, when the state wants to take the young people and educate them rather than having it being done by the family or by teachers selected by the family. It's a way of destroying families and creating a state. You really can't call it a nation anymore. A state full of atomized individuals whose ability to connect with other individuals is very much curtailed, and therefore who are subject to longings and fear and anxieties, and therefore are very manipulable by the state.
Well, one last question, if I could, and I want to throw it back as we head back into the core of your book. I think you'll remember this. I'm going to ask you if you do, and again for your response, because of the way we see things going. Not only here, but pretty much everywhere, especially in Western Europe and traditionally prosperous countries. And that is something I remember being said by Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis. And I don't know that he didn't understand the plan and may not have been a person of the people, but what he said still rings in my ears every time I see something happen, as Cool Hand Luke would say, for our own good. And that is, he said, the greatest right, I believe, that a citizen can have is the right to be left alone. And that is not happening. Do you remember Brandeis saying that? And would you agree that whether he was on our side or not, that was another foretelling of the way, the shape of things to come?
Yes, I agree very much. Increasingly, we're not left to be alone on all kinds of, not our families and not ourselves. There's more and more reporting of more and more different kinds of data, and that becomes a weapon in the hand of the people who collect the data on you. Of course, the whole tax system was itself an enormous state intervention into the life of every individual and family. It's not just about the economic damage. It's not just that it makes you a slave laborer for the state, and you have to cooperate with them in taking your money and using it in all kinds of ways that are very alien to what you'd like the Republic to be and what the Republic's supposed to be. It's just the fact of the intervention. And, it becomes more and more important for us if we could just have areas of genuine privacy in our life. But as I used to write about so often when I wrote about the terrible consequences of abortion, they've created a right to privacy, which, I've drawn out of several other statutes and emphases in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and they've used that right of privacy itself to become a rationale for the state to intervene between a man and a woman, even a husband and his wife, in the name of protecting the health of the mother and her right to dispose of the property of her own body, as they put it. So even the right to privacy has been legalized into a form of state intervention of the most destructive kind.
Yeah, which is an issue that really should never come up for any kind of adjudication or legislation, but it has. Getting back into what we picked up with regarding what we left off with the balkanization, divide and conquer, I think you mentioned it a little bit. We are looking at a return to a pre-World War I Europe. We're almost seeing a movement to return, I guess, the Middle East to pre-British involvement, and I guess in a sense. And then in North America, you're looking at an attempt to return the map to the way it was perhaps before 1830, with what we see now happening with the illegal immigration, mostly from Latino Romanist countries.
Right.
Are we looking at a situation where it's Hegelian in the sense of they're really dividing, which looks like they're giving everyone back their nationalism and ethnicity, but in a way what they're doing is they're kind of dredging back up old hostilities, which we certainly saw in Yugoslavia, so that if the whole thing breaks loose, better for a global agency, say the UN, to come in and say, okay, now look, see, there's a reason why we don't need sovereignties anymore. Do you see this as a Hegelian situation where the division is to eventually be conquered by a supranational entity?
Yes, I do see it in that thesis, antithesis, and new synthesis kind of way. And it's a perfect example of how the world system, the world system that we got familiar with in the 20th century works. It works by inflaming hostilities and then manipulating them by creating and mismanaging crises. And I say mismanaging rather than managing because the crisis has always got to be kept in a state of semi-conflagration with all kinds of, things get out of hand, and then you have to have extreme measures, emergency measures, to deal with them. Yeah, the map is going back because of our immigration laws to what it was, after the purchase of the Northwest Territory. I mean, they would like to detach most of the Southwest, and which was, settled by people from America mostly because of their industry and willingness to work in areas where, and to have some individual freedom and the integrity that goes with freedom in areas where there hadn't been people who were interested in working and being productive and having freedoms, which was ruled, however loosely, you could hardly say ruled, but under the hegemony of a very autocratic, despotic, and slave-owning empire. Somehow people seem to forget that the Spanish Empire was built, and the New World was built on slaves, that I think it were close to 94% of the African slaves that were brought to the New World were sold into what we now call Hispanic countries, into and Central America, with almost half of them going to Brazil. So it's extremely ironic in these days of civil rights and hypersensitivity about the rights of the people we're supposed to call African Americans now, that there is this official multi-decade and multi-department government solicitude for the people of this slave empire, in which Africans were treated with extreme brutality, and from my reading are segregated to great degrees to this day, according to the degree of their color. But yeah, this is it's just like with the so-called civil rights movement was the way it was used. I mean, very few Americans had any problem with the idea of equal rights before the law. That's very American. But that's not the way it was, as we all know, it turned into so-called affirmative action, which was a way of balkanizing America, turning groups of people against each other.
That's right.
Heightening racial consciousness, heightening awareness of superficial differences. That's a way of breaking down America and getting people to mistrust and hate each other. Yeah, we see that, sadly, we see that in America today.
A little quip by me, if I could have a last shot, and that is what's going on now with this legislation that's supposedly somewhere around D.C. on the Hill, whatever, with giving amnesty to illegals. It reminds me back in just after the middle of the 19th century, after the Civil War, when we had the 13th and 14th Amendment, and a lot of wags say, yeah, great, the 13th Amendment freed black people, the 14th enslaved us all, and I can see this happening. It's like, you want to be American citizens? Well, good luck, because you're going to be part of the plantation too, guys. Now, go ahead. You want a shot at that?
It's very bad in many, many ways. This whole thing is so bad, it so urgently needs to be defeated. If you notice, it came up at the debate, if you can call it that, a week or so ago, that the vast numbers of illegal immigrants are going to be part of the justification for pushing through a, quote, tamper-proof national ID. I believe it was Giuliani came out with that one, but he's not the first person to talk about it. He's just leading the program, one of the leaders of the program now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the provision about the head of the household will have to return supposedly to their country of origin for a period of years. Well, voila. Here we have a vast new class of welfare recipients, of fatherless families. You know, if there was actually compliance with that, isn't that interesting? So it's part of the war on the family, too, for everyone. It's part of robbing all existing Americans, because we have to pay a lot more money now for all these new fatherless families. And we'll be increasing, you know, this kind of sluttish way of life and making institutionalizing via government policy of, you know, you live without the head of the household and you get benefits and you get to be a citizen. But, I mean, you know, it's selling degradation, so it's very bad, and it's part of taking down America by stages. You know, it's kind of to make an analogy. If the State Department and their allies in global jihad, of course, had their ultimate wet dream is to flood what remains of Israel with these so-called Arab refugees, you know, which however many millions of them the United Nations says there is at any moment. And one of the few things they haven't yet been able to force down the throat of the Israeli governments, however servile they are, because they know that when that happens, that's the end. The entire state becomes a killing field and it disappears.
That's
and
right.
NATO starts bombing it. Maybe that's what they want to do. But here in America, they're doing it with the Hispanics. Voila. You know, and with everybody else. You know, it's not just Hispanics who come across the southern border. So this is a very dangerous development. It's a major step forward in is creating regional blocks that are more and more removed from their origins as discrete nation states. And if I could, end this note on one rarely mentioned fact, Mexico itself was never really a coherent nation, or even certainly it's never been a functional, coherent state, rather a dysfunctional one, because you've got a small group of ruling Spaniards, then you've got a larger group of Creoles, then you have large groups of despised Indians, and almost as large groups of despised African slaves.
Well,
here you have this country is suddenly our greatest friend, someone was saying on the TV news the other night, and its failure is going to be used as the rationale for this misplaced so-called compassion and humanitarian concerns, as you put us all down on the plantation.
One of the things I did find interesting, and I think this is deliberate as well, I understand that people are people everywhere. I look at a lot of the immigrants that come here, and I realize they just really want to do the best they can. The thing I look at, though, and that you've alluded to just now, and that is, it looked to me as if the Mexican Republic, the United States of Mexico, we should remember that's what they are, was doing, pretty much okay going into the early part of the 20th century, and somehow, some way, fell away. And I can't understand, with the resources they have and everything, why all of a sudden it just kind of, just got lost going backward. But I got to believe that is deliberate to keep the people in a certain situation that would force the issue we have today.
Well, there may be, if you're talking about an international dimension to that, it may well be. Certainly the countries that were, the states that were created, we always have to keep clear, the distinction between a nation and a state, that the states of South and Central America are really not nations. In the true sense of the word. You can look up the simple dictionary definition, and there's a direct correlation between the fact that they are artificial states, ruled top-down from their fairly recent, historically speaking, origins, and their degree of dysfunctionality. So I think, Keith, a lot of that is just hardwired into the way they were set up by Spain. And the fact that they were, Catholic states from the beginning probably didn't help. That's a dimension of this whole biculturalization of America that people usually overlook. By the way, in New England, in Massachusetts, for example, the term bicultural is become almost as privileged as the term multicultural. In fact, you could certainly make a case, just based on their advertising, that the Boston Red Sox are used by the New York Times, which owns the Boston Globe, which actually owns about 17% of the Red Sox, are being used. Yeah, they do. They're being used for a controlled crisis, if that's what the Yankee Red Sox think. The Times, which owns 17% of the Red Sox, are really using the Boston Red Sox as an entertainment product to sell multiculturalism. I mean, they have ads that are in Japanese, Spanish, and English now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the Boston Globe, which people who speak Japanese do not read, and people whose native language is Spanish have their own newspapers. They have Japanese and Spanish headlines sometimes, and the sports page is very helpful. So, as if our kids don't have enough problems reading. Enough kids don't have serious problems reading. Suddenly the Dunkin' Donuts sign is in Japanese. It looks like Morse code. Scramble the brains a little bit more.
You're killing me.
And that's why they have to go spend $100 million for Japanese pitchers. I guess you just can't find somebody in America who'll pitch 5 years for $50 million,
I know, it's such a...
Because they will be able to do commercials in Japanese.
Well,
there we go to the Trilateral Commission, and the whole Pacific angle of the Pacific corollary of the Atlantic Alliance.
You know what? There's a whole book in just the globalization of professional sports.
Yeah.
Which you've seen in everything. Football's been the most resistant. But, hockey and baseball and basketball, it's and I don't know, I hate to say it actually made the game better, but that's another whole ball of wax, and you caught me off guard with that one, Doc. But anyway.
Well, that's good. Keep the brain cells alive. We're all engaged in that battle. But, as far as the level of baseball play itself is concerned, maybe it's made it better in some cases, sure, but that's not the way they use it,
No.
And you can't even hit the mute button fast enough when the inning ends to get away from the real aspect of it. And, you've got a decent pair of play-by-play and commentator guys, they're going to be giving you... at least if you're in New England, you're going to be hearing one way or another. You're going to hear every cliche. They're apologizing for their bosses, who are big players in the global system, and they're selling their bosses' product.
On a lighter note, and then I have to make some ending comments. I have to tell you, when I went up to Vermont in 1978. It was interesting because that was the famous one-game playoff, which was decided by Bucky Dent's home run.
Yeah.
But when I'm not, being a newcomer to New England, when I went into Vermont supermarkets, I would see side by side Yankee Franks, the ballpark Franks, and Red Sox ballpark Franks, trying to just stay side by side without any problems. And I realized here is the true demarcation of cultures. Be that as it may, but that was a really fun time to be up there. I really do, please believe me, want to get into the nuts and bolts of your book with the latest title, World War III. There's a lot of things I wanted to ask you. I didn't get to you. This happens to us all the time. I don't care. I'm not making apologies. Hopefully you'll be back next week sometime, and we can get into it. You've been listening to Dr. Eugene Narrett. He has come out with the last two titles especially, and here's where I want to go also. You do have World War III. That's a short title. Let me just do that for now. You also have another title, Israel and the End Times. Short title also. Folks, you can go to IsraelEndTimes.com. You can go to the book section, take a look at both. Let me ask you this, because you do send out your recent articles via email. Is there a way that people can ask you, request, whatever, to be put on the email list to get those offerings?
Yes. If they go to to my website, IsraelEndTimes.com, go to the Contact Us page, and you'll see a little box. There's a series of options. Do you want to book a lecture? Do you want to contact Professor Narrett? Etc. Just click on the Contact Professor Narrett, and there's a system, and I will get your listeners' or readers' note.
Okay.
In a couple of days or so.
Can we work something out for, say, another week's time?
Sure.
All right, good deal. We're going to do that, and it doesn't take us long to go down all these tributaries, but it sure is fun, and I thank you for being with us. I appreciate the time, and we'll get together for next week. Thanks very much, Doc.
Thank you, Keith.
All right, God bless you. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
I take the blame for where I've been, on all the ones I've had to leave, and now I've shared it all with you. And if you saw through my eyes, what would you do?